Korean Mafia boss fell for her voice, not knowing she's a fat black maid. You can't just pay for my mother's surgery. Iris Vance gasped, her eyes wide with shock as she stared at the terrifying man standing in the sterile hospital hallway. Why not? Kang Dae-hyun asked, his deep voice completely calm, yet carrying a weight that could crush an entire room. Because that is 20 million won. Iris's voice trembled, her hands gripping her faded Maid uniform. For normal people like me, that is an impossible amount of money. Dae-hyun took a slow step closer, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. For me, it is nothing. Are you refusing because of your pride? No. Iris snapped, her chest heaving as she refused to look away. I am refusing because I don't understand why a dangerous mafia boss cares about a plus-sized black maid he barely even knows. Dae-hyun stared at her face, his cold expression softening into something intensely dangerous. Because the moment I heard your voice behind me, something in me stopped fighting. The black SUV screeched to a stop in front of the Grand Haenel Hotel, just as rain crashed heavily across the streets of Seoul. Armed bodyguards jumped out first, scanning every corner with cold eyes before opening the back door. Kang Dae-hyun stepped out slowly. The entire entrance became silent. Hotel workers lowered their heads immediately. Wealthy guests whispered nervously. Even the reporters standing behind the barricades suddenly stopped shouting questions. Everybody in Seoul knew who Kang Dae-hyun was. The young Korean mafia boss never smiled, never forgave betrayal, and never attended public events unless business forced him to. And tonight, he looked angrier than usual. His black suit hugged his tall frame perfectly while rain rolled down his sharp face. One bodyguard hurried forward with an umbrella, but Dae-hyun pushed it aside coldly. Where is Director Choi? He is waiting upstairs, sir. Dae-hyun walked toward the hotel entrance while people quickly moved out of his path. Inside the ballroom, rich women instantly straightened their dresses after seeing him. Some smiled shyly. Others whispered excitedly about the mafia heir, noting how handsome he was and how he never dated anyone, having rejected a billionaire's daughter just last month. Dae-hyun ignored every single stare. His expression remained hard, cold, and untouchable. The charity gala tonight was organized by powerful businessmen, politicians, and elite families. To everyone else, it looked like a glamorous celebration. But Dae-hyun knew the truth. Deals would be made tonight. Enemies would smile while hiding knives, and fake people would pretend to care about the poor while drinking expensive wine. He hated events like this. As he entered the private elevator with his bodyguards, his phone rang. It was his mother. Dae-hyun closed his eyes briefly before answering. You attended? She asked immediately. Good. There are many respectable women there tonight. You are 32 years old already. It is time you stop behaving like a machine. I have work, mother. You need a wife, Dae-hyun. Your father died leaving this empire to you. Do you plan to rule it alone forever? Dae-hyun stared ahead silently. The memory of his father still burned like fire. A powerful mafia leader had been destroyed because he trusted the wrong woman. Love made men weak. That was the lesson Dae-hyun learned early. Since taking over the organization, he never allowed emotions close to him. No relationships, no distractions, and no weakness. I will call you later, he said. You always say that, his mother sighed before he ended the call. The elevator doors opened, and Director Choi waited nervously inside a luxurious conference room. Boss Kang, the older man greeted with a deep bow. Dae-hyun sat down without speaking, and the meeting began immediately. Meanwhile, downstairs on the first floor near the service hallway, Iris Vance struggled to balance 3 large trays while rushing through crowded workers. Iris, hurry up, a female manager snapped. The VIP guests are complaining again. Coming. Iris answered quickly. She adjusted the trays carefully before continuing down the hallway. Despite her size, Iris moved surprisingly fast. Sweat covered her forehead. The kitchen was hot, and the pressure was worse. One mistake tonight could cost her the temporary maid job she desperately needed. And she could not afford that. Not with hospital bills waiting, and not with her mother's medication almost finished. Iris finally pushed through the kitchen doors and entered the crowded ballroom area. Some guests looked at her briefly before looking away. Others stared longer. Iris was used to it. A plus-sized black woman working as a maid in the middle of elite Korean society always attracted attention. Some pitied her, some mocked her, and some acted like she did not belong. But Iris had learned something years ago. People's opinions could not pay bills, so she ignored them. As she placed drinks carefully onto a serving table, two wealthy young women nearby began whispering about her size and wondering why the hotel would hire someone who didn't fit the place. Iris heard every word, but she simply smiled politely and continued working. One of the older cleaners walked past carrying heavy supplies, and without hesitation, Iris hurried over. "Ma'am, let me help you with that," she said kindly. The woman looked relieved, thanking her warmly as Iris carried the heavier box without complaining. From the corner of the room, one of Dae-hyun's bodyguards quietly noticed her actions. People usually behaved differently when rich guests were around, but Iris acted naturally. No pretending, no fake smiles, just pure kindness. Upstairs, the meeting suddenly became tense. Director Choi wiped sweat from his face. "There is a problem with our shipment," he admitted nervously. Dae-hyun's eyes darkened. "What kind of problem?" "We suspect there is an informant," Choi whispered. The room became deathly silent. One bodyguard stepped forward immediately, asking if they should investigate the entire team. Dae-hyun leaned back slowly. "Investigate," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "And remove them." Director Choi swallowed hard. Dae-hyun stood up, signaling the meeting was over. As he walked toward the hallway, another bodyguard approached carefully. "Sir, the chairman of Hanel Group wishes to introduce his daughter to you downstairs. She has been waiting all evening." "No," Dae-hyun kept walking. "I don't care." The bodyguard fell silent immediately, knowing better than to pressure his boss. Meanwhile, Iris hurried toward the private hallways carrying fresh documents requested by the event organizers. She moved quickly, trying not to be late. "Excuse me," someone shouted behind her, and Iris stepped aside immediately as a group of wealthy guests passed arrogantly without acknowledging her. She sighed softly, whispering to herself about what a long night it was going to be. At the same moment, Dae-hyun exited the conference corridor from the opposite direction, his face cold after the stressful meeting. Two bodyguards followed closely behind him. Then suddenly, Iris turned the corner too fast. The papers in her hand slipped slightly. Without fully looking up, she spoke quickly from behind him. "Hello, sir." "Excuse me." Dae-hyun stopped walking completely. The hallway became strangely quiet. Even the bodyguards looked confused. Iris quickly bent down to gather the papers she had almost dropped, still not properly looking at him. But Dae-hyun remained completely frozen. That voice, it was soft, warm, and gentle. For some reason, it wrapped around his chest like something he had not felt in years. Peace. The feeling shocked him. His heartbeat slowed, then strangely began beating harder. Iris stood up again carefully. "Sorry about that," she said politely, and then she started walking away. Dae-hyun stared ahead silently. He had not even seen her face clearly yet. But inside his heart, something impossible happened. A thought entered his mind so clearly that it almost frightened him. "I am going to marry that woman." One of the bodyguards blinked in confusion. "Sir?" Dae-hyun slowly turned around and finally saw her. A plus-sized black woman in a simple maid uniform was walking calmly down the hallway, carrying papers against her chest. There was no designer dress, no expensive jewelry, and no fake elegance. Just natural warmth. The bodyguards exchanged confused looks, seeing their terrifying boss staring for the first time in years. Iris disappeared around the corner, completely unaware. Dae-hyun's eyes remained fixed on the empty hallway. "Find her," he said quietly. The bodyguards looked shocked. "Sir, the woman who just walked away? You mean the maid?" Dae-hyun slowly looked at him, and the dangerous silence in his eyes immediately made the guard bow. "Yes, Boss Kong." Dae-hyun turned away, but his chest still felt strange. That voice. Why did it feel so familiar? Why did hearing a few simple words affect him so deeply? He could still hear her soft voice in his mind, and the warmth in her tone refused to leave him. Downstairs, Iris entered the staff room and finally sat down for a moment. "My legs are dying," she groaned softly. Another worker laughed, telling her she was surviving better than most. Iris smiled tiredly. "I need this paycheck too badly to collapse." Suddenly, her phone buzzed, and the smile on her face faded after seeing a hospital notification. It was a payment reminder. Iris closed her eyes briefly. Her mother's surgery deadline was getting closer. She had already borrowed money from almost everybody she knew, and still it was not enough. "Are you okay?" the other worker asked. Iris forced another smile. "Yeah, I am fine." But she was not fine. Not even close. Back upstairs, Dae-hyun stood near the ballroom entrance while guests nervously greeted him. But tonight, he barely noticed any of them. His mind remained somewhere else, locked onto a soft voice behind him and a woman he had never truly looked at until that moment. He sat with the terrifying realization that for the first time in his life, his heart had made a decision before his mind could stop it. Iris returned to work after her short break, but her mind stayed on the hospital reminder. Every smile she forced now felt heavier. She adjusted her apron and walked back toward the ballroom. The gala had become louder. Champagne glasses clinked. Rich businessmen laughed too loudly, and expensive perfume filled the air. But Iris noticed something else immediately. People looked nervous, far more nervous than before. She spotted several armed men standing near the walls, pretending to be regular security. Then she heard whispers from guests saying that Boss Kong was still here, meaning the real business hadn't started yet, and that someone had betrayed his organization. Iris frowned slightly, wondering who this Boss Kong could be. Before she could think deeper about it, the female manager rushed over again. "Iris, take these drinks to the VIP lounge upstairs and be careful. Those people are very important." Iris grabbed the tray carefully. "Okay." As she entered the private elevator, she finally allowed herself one tired sigh, muttering that her feet were officially gone. The elevator doors opened moments later into a hallway that was much quieter. Too quiet. Iris walked carefully toward the VIP lounge, but suddenly, two men in dark suits stepped into her path with cold, dangerous expressions. "Who are you?" one asked. Iris blinked, holding up her tray, delivering drinks. The man looked her up and down suspiciously, commanding her to open the tray. Iris obeyed immediately. After checking the glasses, the man stepped aside, telling her she could go in. Iris nodded nervously and pushed the door open. The moment she entered the lounge, she immediately felt the heavy tension. Several powerful men sat around expensive tables, speaking in hushed tones. And at the center of the room sat the same tall man she had nearly bumped into earlier. This time she saw him clearly. He had a sharp jaw, dark eyes, and a cold expression that made the entire room seem to breathe around him. Iris intensely understood that he was incredibly important. Dae-hyun looked up the moment she entered. Their eyes met, and for one strange second, the rest of the room completely disappeared. Iris quickly looked away first, suddenly feeling nervous without understanding why. "Drinks, sir," she said softly while placing the tray down. Dae-hyun continued watching her up close. She looked even more different from the women who usually surrounded his world. There was no fake smile, no desperate flirting, and no fear. Just complete honesty. Director Choi noticed the intense staring immediately, his eyes widening slightly because Boss Kong never stared at women. Iris finished arranging the glasses. "Anything else, sir?" she asked politely. One wealthy businessman at the table smirked, looking at her. "You speak Korean?" "Yes," Iris smiled lightly. "My mother is Korean." The man laughed mockingly. "But your father definitely wasn't." A few people chuckled quietly in the room. Iris's smile faded slightly, used to comments like that but still stung by them. Before she could answer, Dae-hyun's voice cut through the room like a blade. "That is enough." The room immediately became silent. The businessman cleared his throat awkwardly, apologizing to Boss Kong. Iris looked toward Daehyun in surprise. He was still watching her, not cruelly or mockingly, but protectively. It made her strangely uncomfortable. "Thank you, sir," she said politely before turning to leave. But just before she reached the door, Daehyun spoke. "Wait." Iris stopped, slowly turning back as Daehyun stood up. The movement alone changed the atmosphere inside the room, making even the powerful businessmen look nervous. Iris swallowed hard as he walked closer, looking tall, calm, and dangerous. "Name?" he asked. "Iris," she replied. "Full name, Iris Vance." The moment she said it, something flashed briefly across Daehyun's face. A strange feeling like the name touched an old memory he could not fully reach. "Iris Vance," he repeated quietly, and the sound of her name in his deep voice made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Yes, sir." "You work here permanently?" "No, sir. Temporary event staff." Daehyun nodded slowly, then turned to face the room, saying something that shocked everyone present. "Leave the tray. Sit down." Iris blinked in disbelief. "What?" I said. "Sit." The businessmen exchanged stunned looks, and even the bodyguards looked confused. Iris laughed nervously. "I don't think your guests would like that very much, sir." For the first time all evening, the corner of Daehyun's lips moved slightly into a faint, rare smile. "I am not asking them." The room became even more shocked. Iris looked around awkwardly, feeling every eye in the lounge locking onto her. "I really should get back to work," she said carefully. Daehyun studied her quietly for another moment, then finally nodded. Iris bowed politely before leaving the room as quickly as she could. The second the door closed behind her, Director Choi stared openly at his boss. "Boss Kong, in all the years I have known you, I have never seen you speak to a woman like that." Daehyun picked up his glass slowly, staring at the door. Neither had he. Meanwhile, Iris leaned against the hallway wall outside, her heart beating strangely fast. What was that? She whispered to herself, feeling like that man's intense eyes had looked directly inside her soul. Another worker approached her. "Iris, there you are. Do you know the guy inside that room?" Iris shook her head. "No, who is he?" The worker lowered her voice to a terrified whisper. "That is Kang Daehyun, the Mafia boss." Iris froze. "What?" "They say he controls half the underground businesses in Seoul." The worker nodded quickly. "And they say he is terrifying. My cousin worked at another hotel he visited once, and somebody made a mistake and disappeared the next day." Iris's stomach tightened painfully as she replayed every interaction she just had with him. The staring, the questions, the strange intensity. "Why was he talking to me?" she whispered. "I don't know," the worker admitted, but everybody in there looked completely shocked. Iris suddenly felt very uneasy. Back inside the lounge, the business meeting continued, but Daehyun barely listened. His attention stayed entirely on Iris. Iris Vance. Even her name felt warm to him. He hated how interested he already was, and he hated how his mind kept replaying her soft voice. One businessman finally laughed carefully, trying to break the tension. "Boss Kong seems unusually interested tonight." The room became tense immediately, as nobody joked with Daehyun. But surprisingly, he did not react angrily. Instead, he simply looked at his lead bodyguard. "What do you know about her?" Director Choi almost choked on his drink. "You mean the maid?" "Yes," Daehyun commanded. The bodyguard immediately answered, stating that she was 28 years old, had a Korean mother and an American father, worked temporary cleaning jobs, and lived in the Mapo district. Daehyun's eyes narrowed slightly. "You investigated her already?" "You told us to find her, sir," the guard replied carefully. Daehyun leaned back quietly. "Continue." "She currently has severe financial difficulties because her mother is sick and facing massive surgery expenses," the guard explained. Daehyun felt something cold move through his chest, asking if she was handling it alone. "Yes, sir," the guard confirmed. "There is no husband or boyfriend that we could find." The wealthy businessman laughed softly, suggesting it was a beautiful opportunity for Boss Kong. Daehyun slowly shifted his gaze to the man, and the laughter died immediately. Nobody dared to speak again. Minutes later, the meeting finally ended, and the guests began leaving the private lounge carefully. Dae-hyun remained seated alone until his bodyguard approached cautiously, announcing that the car was ready. Dae-hyun stayed silent for a long moment before suddenly asking, "Do you believe people can recognize someone before understanding why?" The bodyguard blinked, confused. "Sir?" "That voice," Dae-hyun murmured. Even saying it aloud felt strange. She sounded familiar. The bodyguard carefully chose his words, suggesting that perhaps he had met her before. Dae-hyun's eyes darkened thoughtfully. Maybe something worse. Maybe she is becoming important, and important things always become dangerous in my world. Downstairs, Iris finished another exhausting cleaning task before finally checking her phone again. There were 3 missed calls from the hospital, and fear rushed into her chest instantly. She stepped into an empty hallway and called back quickly. "Hello, this is Iris Vance. Iris, your mother's condition became unstable earlier tonight," the nurse said urgently. Iris's heart dropped. What happened? "She is stable again for now, but the surgery cannot wait much longer," the nurse explained. Iris closed her eyes tightly, asking how much time they had left. "Very little," the nurse replied softly. Tears burned behind Iris's eyes. "I understand," she whispered, and the call ended. Iris leaned against the wall quietly, and for a moment the strong woman everybody saw finally cracked. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered brokenly, covering her face as the pressure became completely unbearable. And at that exact moment, Dae-hyun stepped into the hallway from the opposite side. He stopped immediately after seeing her. Iris quickly wiped her eyes, feeling deeply embarrassed. "I am sorry," she said softly, her voice cracking. "I didn't know anybody was here." Dae-hyun stared at her silently, and then, something dangerous happened for the first time in many years. The feared Korean Mafia boss felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to protect someone. He stood motionless at the far end of the hallway while Iris quickly tried to compose herself, forcing out an embarrassed laugh and muttering about it being a long night. But Dae-hyun did not move, and he did not speak. He simply watched her, and somehow, that heavy silence felt louder than any words. Iris straightened her maid uniform awkwardly. "I should get back to work," she said, trying to walk past him. But his deep voice stopped her instantly. "Is your mother dying?" The question hit too directly and too personally. Iris froze, slowly turning back toward him. Her eyes searched his sharp face carefully, wondering who could ask something like that so calmly. But strangely, she did not feel mocked. She felt truly seen. "She is sick," Iris answered softly. Dae-hyun's eyes remained fixed on her. "What illness?" Iris hesitated, knowing most people lost interest whenever conversations became serious, preferring shallow sympathy. But something about him made her answer honestly. "Heart complications," she admitted quietly. "She needs surgery." "How much?" Iris blinked. "What? How much is the surgery?" Iris chose to shake her head immediately. "It is okay." "I didn't ask if it was okay," Dae-hyun said, his voice firm. Iris stared at him in disbelief, wondering who this man thought he was. He spoke like someone completely used to controlling every situation around him, and somehow people just obeyed him naturally. "I can handle it," Iris said carefully. Dae-hyun noticed the lie immediately. Her tired eyes already revealed the truth of her exhaustion and fear. He had seen many desperate people in his world before, but Iris felt different. She carried her pain quietly, without bitterness, without manipulation, and without trying to gain pity. And somehow that affected him more than it should. "You were crying," he said calmly. Iris looked away immediately. "That is embarrassing." "It is human," his answer surprised her. She looked back at him slowly, realizing that for a dangerous mafia boss, he spoke unexpectedly gently. He was being careful and controlled, almost like he was trying hard not to scare her. "I am fine," she whispered. Dae-hyun took one slow step closer, his presence overwhelming up close. "You are not fine." Iris's heartbeat suddenly became uneven as he stood over her, tall, sharp, and calm in a terrifying way. Even his silence carried massive power. And yet, his eyes no longer looked completely cold. Suddenly, a loud voice interrupted the moment. "Boss Kong." One of his bodyguards rushed toward them quickly. "There is a problem downstairs." Immediately, Dae-hyun's expression changed, and the softness disappeared as the cold armor returned instantly. "What happened?" "The Dung group arrived unexpectedly," the guard reported. Dae-hyun's jaw tightened. "I told them not to attend." "They insisted, sir, and we suspect they are planning something." The bodyguard lowered his voice. Iris saw something dangerous move across Dae-hyun's face. Not anger, but a cold, deadly calculation. He looked toward Iris briefly before speaking to his guard. "Handle it." "Yes, sir." The bodyguard hurried away. Iris cleared her throat awkwardly, telling him he should probably go. Dae-hyun remained still for another moment before looking at her. "What time do you finish work?" Iris blinked. "Why?" "I asked the question," he stated. Iris crossed her arms slightly, looking directly into his eyes. "And I am asking why." For one brief second, Dae-hyun almost smiled again. Nobody questioned him this way, certainly not a maid looking straight at him. "Answer me first," he said. Midnight. Iris hesitated. Dae-hyun nodded once. Then he turned and walked away without another word, leaving Iris staring after him in utter confusion, whispering to herself about what kind of man he truly was. Downstairs, the atmosphere inside the ballroom had changed completely. The moment Dae-hyun entered, a suffocating tension spread through the room. Across the ballroom stood another group of powerful men dressed in dark suits, and their leader smiled coldly after spotting him. "Kong Dae-hyun," the man called out. Dae-hyun stopped several feet away, his expression blank. "Lee Sung-ho." The air between them became instantly dangerous, and guests nearby slowly began to move away. Even Iris, who had returned to the floor, noticed the tension from across the room. One older worker whispered nervously beside her that this was very bad, explaining that the men were from the rival Dung syndicate and were real Mafia enemies. Before Iris could process anything further, Lee Sung-ho laughed loudly. "You should smile more, Dae-hyun. People might think you are unhappy to see me." "You were not invited," Dae-hyun replied smoothly. "Yet here I am." Sung-ho smirked. Several bodyguards subtly reached beneath their jackets, making the ballroom feel entirely suffocating. Iris watched nervously while pretending to arrange glasses nearby, feeling in her gut that something terrible was about to happen. Lee Sung-ho glanced around dramatically, calling it a beautiful and expensive party before his eyes landed briefly on Iris. A cruel smile appeared on his face as he muttered that the workers could use an upgrade. Iris immediately looked away, recognizing that mocking, judgmental look. But before Sung-ho could continue, Dae-hyun suddenly stepped slightly forward, a movement that instantly silenced the entire room. "You came here to talk business," Dae-hyun said coldly. "Then talk." Sung-ho smirked, moving closer. "Fine, let us skip the fake politeness. We both know Seoul is becoming too small for two organizations." The room became deadly quiet, and Iris could barely breathe. This was not business. This was an open declaration of war, hidden behind expensive suits. Lee Sung-ho smiled again, stating that sooner or later, one of them would disappear. Dae-hyun's face remained completely unreadable. "Then pray it isn't you." The heavy threat landed with terrifying weight, and even Iris felt chills hearing it. Sung-ho laughed loudly, calling him dramatic. Then suddenly, a loud crash exploded nearby. A frightened waiter had accidentally dropped an entire tray of glasses, and the sharp sound shattered across the tense ballroom. Everybody jumped. One bodyguard instantly pulled a weapon halfway out of his jacket. Women screamed, and panic spread immediately. Iris's heart nearly stopped. But what happened next shocked her most. The second the chaos erupted, Dae-hyun's eyes did not search for his enemies. They searched the room instantly for her. Their eyes met across the panicked ballroom, and somehow, in the middle of all that sudden danger, Iris felt strangely safe. The waiter fell to the floor, apologizing repeatedly, and the tension slowly eased after security realized it was just an accident. Lee Sung-ho laughed mockingly, noting how nervous people were tonight. Dae-hyun ignored him completely, keeping his eyes locked onto Iris until Sung-ho noticed, his smile slowly fading as his eyes narrowed with intense interest. After several more tense exchanges, the rival group finally left the ballroom, but the damage was already done. The atmosphere never fully recovered, and guests quietly began leaving early. Iris helped the other workers clean up the broken glass while replaying that strange moment in her head, wondering why Dae-hyun had looked for her first, and why it even mattered to her. Iris, the female manager, hurried over, interrupting her thoughts. The VIP lounge requested fresh drinks again. Iris almost groaned, muttering that her legs were falling off. Well, they need you upstairs, rush. Iris grabbed another tray reluctantly and headed back up. As she entered the private hallway again, she noticed there were now 2 guards standing outside, enforcing much stricter security than before. One opened the door for her silently. Inside the large lounge, Dae-hyun sat completely alone this time, making the room feel quieter and darker. Iris carefully placed the tray down on the table. You people drink a lot, she joked lightly before she could even think to stop herself. The word just slipped out naturally. Immediately, one bodyguard near the door looked absolutely horrified, as nobody joked casually with Kang Dae-hyun. But surprisingly, Dae-hyun looked at her calmly. You talk a lot, he responded. Iris blinked, wondering if he was teasing her, and folded her arms. That is because somebody in this room barely talks at all. The bodyguard looked ready to faint from shock, and Iris noticed the reaction immediately, realizing she might have gone too far. Dae-hyun slowly dismissed his guards with a simple gesture. Leave us. The men hesitated briefly, then obeyed, closing the door behind them. Now, Iris suddenly felt nervous again, realizing that being completely alone with a mafia boss was a terrible life decision. Dae-hyun stood up slowly. You are afraid now? Iris laughed awkwardly. Shouldn't I be? Do you think I will hurt you? He asked, walking closer. Iris looked into his eyes carefully, and honestly, she didn't feel any malice. I don't know, she admitted softly. Dae-hyun moved closer, not threateningly, but intentionally. Most people fear me immediately. Iris smiled slightly, looking up at him. Well, you do look terrifying. This time, Dae-hyun actually smiled faintly, a real, brief smile that changed his entire face, and Iris suddenly understood why people were obsessed with him. The tiny smile completely transformed the room. You shouldn't smile suddenly like that, she muttered. Dae-hyun raised an eyebrow. Why? Iris shook her head quickly, telling him to never mind as she felt a slight blush creeping onto her cheeks. Dae-hyun noticed it immediately, and seeing her blush affected him more than any underworld threat ever could. You are different around me, he said quietly. Iris frowned. What does that mean? You don't pretend, he explained. Iris looked down briefly. Pretending is exhausting. Dae-hyun studied her face carefully, taking in every honest emotion, realizing that nothing about her felt calculated. In his dangerous world, that made her rare and dangerously captivating. Then suddenly, Iris's phone rang loudly. She checked the screen, and the intense fear instantly returned to her face. Dae-hyun noticed the sudden shift. Answer it. Iris picked up quickly. Yes? Her expression changed within seconds as sheer panic entered her voice. I am coming right now. The call ended, and Iris grabbed her cleaning bag immediately. My mother collapsed. Dae-hyun's expression hardened instantly. Where? Seoul Central Hospital, she cried. Iris hurried toward the door, but Dae-hyun caught her wrist gently, his grip warm and firm. I will take you. Iris looked shocked, shaking her head. That is okay, I can take a taxi. I wasn't asking, he said directly. Their eyes locked again, and this time, Iris saw a powerful determination, possession, and protection inside his gaze. It was the kind of look that could move mountains or destroy empires. And for the first time all night, Iris Vance realized that the feared Korean mafia boss was no longer simply interested in her. He had already decided she belonged in his life. The black sedan tore through the rainy streets of Seoul, its tires slicing through deep puddles as Kang Dae-hyun drove with a terrifying, calm precision. In the passenger seat, Iris Vance pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her fingers trembling so hard she could barely hold her phone. Dae-hyun kept his eyes on the dark road ahead, but his knuckles were stark white against the leather steering wheel. "Breathe," he commanded softly. The simple word seemed to vibrate through the quiet interior of the car. Iris let out a shaky breath, turning her head to look at his sharp profile. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the night. "You don't even know me, Boss Kang." Dae-hyun did not look at her, but his jaw tightened. "I know enough," he replied smoothly. "I know you are drowning, and I have the power to pull you out. Don't look for hidden motives where there are none." Iris let out a bitter, exhausted laugh, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Men like you always have motives. People like me are just invisible scenery in your world. I am a plus-sized, black maid who cleans up after the people you destroy. Why care now?" Dae-hyun suddenly swung the car into the hospital driveway, bringing the massive vehicle to a smooth stop right at the emergency entrance. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a frightening intensity. "Because you are not invisible to me, Iris. Now get out. Your mother is waiting." Iris did not wait. She pushed the door open and sprinted through the sliding glass doors into the sterile, brightly lit hospital lobby. The smell of antiseptic hit her immediately, making her stomach twist with familiar dread. She rushed to the front desk, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Iris Vance. I'm here for Clara Vance," she cried to the nurse. The nurse checked her screen quickly, her face softening with sympathy. "She is in the intensive care unit on the 3rd floor, dear. The doctor is with her now." "Thank you." Iris turned toward the elevators, but before she could step forward, a heavy, warm hand settled gently on the small of her back. She looked up in surprise to find Dae-hyun standing right beside her. He had followed her inside, completely ignoring his 2 lead bodyguards who were now taking up defensive positions near the hospital entrance, looking like dark, lethal statues. "You don't have to come up," Iris whispered, feeling suddenly self-conscious about her faded uniform in the middle of the clean hospital. Dae-hyun ignored her completely, pressing the elevator button. "I told you I am staying," he said. The elevator ride was silent, but the tension inside the small metal box was suffocating. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, a doctor was already walking out of Clara's room, looking exhausted. "Doctor." Iris rushed forward. "How is she? Is she okay?" The doctor sighed softly, looking at Iris's frantic face. "Miss Vance, your mother survived the collapse, but her heart is failing rapidly. The medication is no longer working. If we do not perform the corrective valve surgery within the next 48 hours, her body will simply give out." Iris felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. 48 hours. She needed 20 million won. An impossible sum. "How much time do I have to make the deposit?" she asked, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. The doctor looked down uncomfortably. "The hospital policy requires at least half the payment before we can schedule the operating room. I am truly sorry." Iris covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking as the final wall of her strength crumbled completely. She was entirely alone. "Schedule the surgery for tomorrow morning." Dae-hyun's deep voice cut through the hallway like an absolute command. Iris dropped her hands, staring at him in utter shock. The doctor blinked, confused by the tall, dangerous-looking man in the expensive suit. "Excuse me? Who are you?" "I am the person paying," Dae-hyun stated smoothly, pulling a sleek black card from his jacket and handing it directly to the doctor. "Prepare the paperwork. Charge the full amount, plus whatever premium care she requires post-surgery." The doctor looked at the black card, his eyes widening as he recognized the exclusive, unnumbered VIP marker. "Right away, sir," the doctor said, his entire attitude shifting into deep respect as he hurried down the hallway to process the order. "Are you insane?" Iris gasped, turning on Dae-hyun the moment the doctor was out of earshot. Her chest heaved with a mixture of immense relief and sheer terror. "You can't just do that." You can't just buy my mother's life. Why not? Daehyun asked, his expression completely calm, yet carrying a weight that could crush an entire room. Because that is 20 million won. Iris's voice trembled, her hands gripping her apron. For normal people like me, that is an impossible amount of money. For me, it is nothing. Daehyun took a slow step closer, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. Are you refusing because of your pride? No, Iris snapped, refusing to look away even as his towering presence overwhelmed her. I am refusing because I don't understand why a dangerous mafia boss cares about a plus-sized black maid he barely even knows. Daehyun stared at her face, his cold expression softening into something intensely dangerous, his voice dropping to a low whisper that made her skin tingle. Because the moment I heard your voice behind me in that hallway, something in me stopped fighting. For years, my life has been nothing but noise, betrayal, and war. But your voice gave me peace. If 20 million won can keep that peace alive, then it is the cheapest deal I have ever made. Iris stared at him, her mouth opening slightly but no words coming out. The raw honesty in his dark eyes was terrifying because a man like Kang Daehyun did not lie, and he certainly did not beg. He was laying his cards on the table, claiming her with a quiet certainty that left her completely breathless. Before she could answer, the heavy sound of clicking heels echoed down the sterile hallway. Both Daehyun and Iris turned to see a group of sharply dressed people approaching. At the center was an older Korean woman dressed in an immaculate, custom-tailored hanbok, her face fixed in a mask of absolute arrogance. It was Daehyun's mother, Madame Kang. Daehyun, what is the meaning of this? Madame Kang demanded, her sharp eyes sweeping over the hallway before landing heavily on Iris. Her gaze lingered on Iris's size, her skin color, and her stained maid uniform with pure, unfiltered disgust. Your men told me you abandoned a critical syndicate meeting to drive a hotel maid to the hospital. Have you completely lost your mind? Mother, you should choose your next words very carefully, Daehyun said, his voice instantly turning into ice. The air in the hallway became so cold that even the passing nurses picked up their pace to get away. Madame Kang laughed mockingly, stepping closer to Iris. Look at her. Daehyun. She is a servant, a nobody. She doesn't even belong in our country, let alone in your circle. The Kang family requires an alliance with an elite house, not a broken, plus-sized foreigner who cleans floors for a living. Iris flinched slightly, the familiar sting of discrimination burning through her chest. She began to step back, but Daehyun's hand instantly gripped her waist, pulling her firmly against his side. The sheer possessiveness of the gesture made Iris gasp. She belongs wherever I am, Daehyun said, his voice low, steady, and deadlier than a gunshot. If you insult her again, mother, I will personally strip every single luxury the Kang estate provides you. I rule the empire now, not you, not my dead father, me. If I choose her, the entire underworld will bow to her, or I will burn it to the ground. Madame Kang's face turned pale with shock. She stared at her son, realizing for the first time that he was completely serious. This was no longer a machine following orders. This was a king making his own laws. You will regret this, Daehyun, she hissed, turning on her heel and marching away with her entourage following quickly behind her. Daehyun slowly let go of Iris's waist, though his eyes remained fixed on her face. Iris was shaking, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the conflict she had just been dragged into. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered, looking down at her shoes. She is right. I don't belong in your world. Your world is dangerous. Daehyun reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy black card with a single phone number engraved in gold text. He pressed it gently into her hand. My world is dangerous, he admitted quietly. That is why you should stay away from me. But if you ever find yourself in the dark, call this number. It is a direct line to me. No bodyguards, no assistants. Just me. Iris looked at the card, her heart hammering against her ribs. He turned and walked down the hallway, leaving her alone with the weight of his protection pressing heavily against her soul. Over the next 3 weeks, Iris's life transformed into a surreal blur. Her mother's surgery was a massive success, with the best surgeons in the country treating Clara like royalty. Every single medical bill vanished before Iris could even look at it. But Daehyun did not show his face at the hospital again. Instead, his presence was felt everywhere else. When the hotel manager tried to fire Iris for leaving her shift early, the manager was abruptly replaced the next morning by a polite executive who offered Iris a permanent, high-paying administrative position. When trashy online forums began circulating cruel, anonymous photos of Iris from the gala, mocking her weight and her race, the entire website was permanently shut down within hours, and the people who posted the comments suddenly found themselves facing severe legal and financial ruin. Daehyun was fighting a silent war for her, clearing her path without ever asking for a single thing in return. But the peace did not last long. 2 weeks later, while Iris was sitting by her mother's hospital bed, a sudden shift in the air made her look up. The hallway outside was too quiet. The usual chatter of nurses and the beeping of machines had completely stopped. Iris stood up carefully, her stomach tightening with a deep, instinctive dread. She walked to the heavy wooden door of the private room and cracked it open slightly. Her breath caught in her throat. Standing at the end of the hallway were 4 men in dark suits. But they were not Daehyun's men. They carried heavy, silenced weapons, and their faces were twisted in cold, ruthless expressions. It was the Dung syndicate. Lee Sung-ho had found his target. "Where is the maid?" One of the men whispered harshly into his radio. "Find her quickly. Boss Lee wants her alive to draw Daehyun out." Iris slammed the door shut, locking it instantly. Her hands shook violently as she backed away from the door. "Mom," she whispered to her sleeping mother, her voice trembling. "We have to hide." She looked around the room, but there was nowhere to go. Suddenly, she remembered the heavy black card in her pocket. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and dialed the single golden number. The phone didn't even ring twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. "Iris?" Daehyun's voice sounded tense, background noise of shouting and crashing metal echoing on his end. "They're here," Iris sobbed, crouching down by the side of her mother's bed. "Dangerous men with guns. They're looking for me in the ICU." The line went dead quiet for one horrifying second. Then, Daehyun spoke, his voice completely stripped of any humanity, leaving only a cold, primordial rage. "Lock the door. Hide under the bed. Do not look up until you hear my voice. I am coming." The call disconnected. Iris quickly squeezed herself into the narrow space beneath the heavy medical bed, pulling the sheets down to cover her. Seconds later, a heavy kick splintered the wooden door of the room. The men stormed inside, their heavy boots thudding against the linoleum floor. "She's not here," one shouted, kicking a chair over in frustration. "Search the bathroom. Hurry up. Daehyun's main force is already downstairs." Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the lower floors of the hospital, followed by the rapid, deafening echo of gunfire coming from the hallway outside. Shouting erupted. The men inside the room spun around, but before they could even raise their weapons, the door was torn completely off its hinges. Kang Daehyun stormed into the room like a demon unleashed from the depths of hell. His white shirt was splattered with fresh, dark blood, and his eyes were entirely black with unhinged fury. He didn't say a single word. With a terrifying speed, he disarmed the first man, breaking his arm with a sickening crack before throwing him out into the corridor. The second man tried to aim his weapon, but Daehyun fired 2 precise shots into his chest without blinking. The remaining rivals scrambled out the shattered doorway, fleeing for their lives as Daehyun's heavy bodyguards flooded the floor, securing every exit with military efficiency. The room became deathly quiet, save for the sound of Daehyun's heavy, ragged breathing. Iris slowly pushed the sheet aside, her eyes wide with terror as she crawled out from beneath the bed. She looked at the blood on his shirt, her chest heaving. Daehyun turned his head, his terrifying gaze instantly locking onto her. The moment he saw she was unharmed, the deadly, monstrous mask completely shattered. He dropped his weapon onto the floor, taking 3 long, desperate steps forward before pulling her up into his arms. He held her with a fierce, crushing intensity, his face burying into her neck as his entire body trembled. "You're safe," he whispered fiercely, his voice cracking with a raw vulnerability that shocked her to her very core. "You're safe. I'm sorry I was late." Iris froze for a moment, the heat of his body and the wild pounding of his heart telling her everything she needed to know. This feared, ruthless monster was completely terrified of losing her. She slowly wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders, letting her tears fall onto his bloody shirt. From the bed, Clara Vance slowly opened her eyes, groaning softly as she took in the shattered room, the bodyguards, and the terrifying man currently holding her daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. Clara looked at Daehyun's blood-stained clothes, then at the pure devotion written across his sharp face. "You love my daughter," Clara said, her voice weak but steady. Daehyun slowly pulled back from Iris, turning to look at the older woman. He did not hesitate. He did not hide behind his pride. "Yes," he said clearly, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "I love her, and I will spend the rest of my life ensuring nobody ever scares her again." Iris looked up at him, her heart completely melting as she realized that her invisible life was officially over. She was loved by a monster who would destroy the world just to keep her safe. 2 weeks later, the grand ballroom of the Lotte World Tower was filled to maximum capacity for the annual High Society Winter Gala. Every billionaire, politician, and elite family leader in South Korea was present, dressed in millions of dollars worth of silk and diamonds. The air was thick with elite gossip. Rumors had been flying for days that Boss Kong had completely wiped out the Dung Syndicate in a single night of brutal underworld warfare, and tonight was his victory celebration. Madame Kong stood near the stage, surrounded by wealthy heiresses, her face tight with anxiety as she waited for her son to arrive. Suddenly, the massive double doors of the ballroom swung open. The music stopped instantly. The whispers died. Kong Daehyun walked into the room, looking breathtakingly handsome in a custom-tailored velvet tuxedo. But nobody was looking at him. Every eye in the elite crowd was completely locked onto the woman whose hand he was holding with an iron, unbreakable grip. It was Iris Vance. She looked absolutely stunning, wearing a deep emerald green silk gown that hugged her plus-sized curves beautifully, her natural hair styled elegantly, and a massive, priceless diamond necklace glittering against her dark skin. She moved with a quiet, regal confidence, completely ignoring the shocked, judgmental gapes of the high society crowd. Daehyun led her directly through the center of the room, treating her like a literal queen entering her court. An arrogant, older billionaire stepped into their path, clearing his throat with a tight, disapproving smile. "Boss Kong, congratulations on your recent underworld victory," the man said, his eyes darting to Iris with a subtle, mocking smirk. "But we are all a bit confused by your choice of a date tonight. Surely the leader of the Kong Empire could find a woman who actually fits the stature of our society. A maid, Daehyun?" The room became suffocatingly quiet as people leaned in to hear the response. Daehyun stopped walking. He slowly turned his head to look at the billionaire, his dark eyes instantly turning into dead pools of absolute malice. The man's smile froze, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead, as he realized he had just stepped over a fatal line. Daehyun slowly reached out, tightly wrapping his arm around Iris's waist and pulling her firmly against his chest in front of everyone. He looked out over the entire room of stunned billionaires, his deep voice booming through the silent ballroom like a thunderclap. "Look at her very carefully," Daehyun commanded, his tone dripping with an absolute, terrifying authority. "For years, your sons and daughters have come to me with fake smiles, designer dresses, and empty souls, trying to buy a piece of my power. But every single one of them was just white noise to me. The only woman who ever gave me peace was her. From the very first moment she spoke behind me in a quiet hallway, my heart already knew she belonged with me. She is not a servant to anyone in this room. She is the queen of my empire. If any of you ever look at her with mockery again, or if anyone dares to whisper a single cruel word about her size, her race, or her past, I will personally destroy your businesses, your families, and your lives." The entire high society crowd gasped, several wealthy women covering their mouths in utter shock. Madame Kong dropped her wine glass, the crystal shattering loudly against the marble floor. But Daehyun didn't care about any of them. He slowly looked down at Iris, his hard, dangerous expression melting into a soft, breathtakingly beautiful smile that was meant only for her. Iris looked up into his dark eyes, her heart swelling with an absolute, fearless love. He leaned down slowly, pressing his lips against hers in a gentle, deeply passionate kiss right in the middle of the ballroom, sealing her fate in front of all of Seoul. The invisible maid was gone forever. Iris Vance had finally found her home in the arms of the most dangerous man in the country, and the entire underworld was now hers to rule.